When Israel signed the Oslo Accords in 1993, she agreed to give away portions of the land promised to her by God. In 2000, at Camp David, Prime Minister Ehud Barak agreed to divide Jerusalem, the place that God said he would place his name forever. Is this why all the difficulties are now descending on the nation of Israel? We'll talk about it today on Politics and Religion.
Look, there are two things I don't discuss: politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
Politics determines how we'll live here on earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it. Well, it's hard not to talk about what is happening in the Middle East right now. I'm not talking about Libya. I'm not talking about Syria, even though things are boiling there. Demonstrations continue. Reform is taking place or not taking place, depending on which side you are on. Iran is gaining power. Money is gushing into the Middle East because the price of oil has gone up so much. So many things happening. But in the middle of it all is an appointment with prophetic destiny, and that is what will happen to the nation of Israel. We have this prophecy that a certain event will signal the beginning of the final 7 years to the second coming of Jesus Christ to this earth. Now, just stop right there and think for a moment what I just said. There is an event that the Bible specifically says will signal the beginning of the final 7 years. That's in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 years until the second coming of Jesus Christ to this earth. Now the news is being dominated the last few days with developments about that particular event. It is totally within the realm of possibility that that event could occur between now and September. Now, that's an amazing thing to even think about, but nonetheless, that's what's going on. I'm going to tell you the story. Well, first of all, there's an article today. This particular article comes from the Jerusalem Post, and it's entitled "Palestinian Statehood, an Even Bigger Nuclear Option." Diplomats, politicians, pundits, and voyeurs of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have a newfound obsession: the prospect of Palestine becoming the 193rd member state in the United Nations this September, a move referred to as the Palestinians' nuclear option. Now, think about all this. It's actually saying to us that between now and September, we could see the becoming of Palestine as the 193rd member state in the United Nations, with all of the implications. Now, while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has yet to present an Israeli counter-proposal, he says he will do it next month, a peace plan or any effective measures to prevent the unilateral declaration of a Palestinian state within pre-1967 borders, he might be well served to consider an outcome that fares even worse for Israel. Something even worse could happen. What's he talking about? Late last year, Palestinian Authority negotiator and senior Fatah member Mohammed Shatayeh told reporters that if the PA's bid, the Palestinian Authority's bid, for statehood in the UN fails, that Palestinians have another option up their sleeve to request UN custodianship of the Palestinian territories. Now, what's that going to mean? Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak was completely justified last month when he coined the term diplomatic tsunami to describe the prospect of a unilaterally declared Palestinian state gaining recognition and membership in the United Nations. Okay, now let's make sure we're getting this. What are we talking about here? We're talking about the Palestinians going to the United Nations, which is the recognized global governance body. To say that in plain English, instead of diplomatic jargon, the United Nations is considered the only structure for one world government, which the people presently running the world believe we must all now eventually have. There is coming a one world government where borders will be abolished. That's the reason our government steadfastly refuses to protect our borders. That's not because they can't. It's because they won't. They are believers in one world government. They embrace the concept that the number one cause of war on earth is conflict among nations. So if there were no nations, if we moved into a system of global governance, if the day of the nation state in fact is over, and we will all answer to a single global authority, the United Nations, we would have one army. The army wouldn't fight with itself, so there would be no war. War would be outlawed. You know, there's already a law on the books that plans to outlaw war, and it means to be enforced by the International Criminal Court at The Hague. That law simply says there's 4 categories of crimes that the International Criminal Court can try. They can try genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, or crimes of aggression. Now, they've got stuck on that 4th one because the nations of the world fully understand exactly what it means. The International Criminal Court has been pushed and promoted by the World Federalist Association, which unabashedly embraces a one world governmental system. You say, we'll never have a one world government. Well, you haven't seen our DVD, World Government Forming Now. We prove in that DVD that world government has been planned for and in process of construction for 100 years, and the time has come to close the jaws on the trap, and you're going to be in the trap, and so am I. Okay, now, let's make sure what I'm telling you today. The International Criminal Court, the crime called a crime of aggression, would simply mean any military action that was not previously approved by the UN Security Council. For example, George Bush's war against Iraq was considered an illegal war. Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the United Nations at the time, was pressed, do you believe Iraq was an illegal war? Finally, he said, yes, I do believe that was an illegal war. Why was it illegal? Because the UN, the world government, did not approve it. Now, is Libya a legal or an illegal war? Well, according to Barack Obama, it is a legal war because the UN approved it. Bosnia really would have been an illegal war, even though NATO participated in it, yet it did not have UN approval because the UN at the time did not have the right to involve itself in the domestic affairs of a nation. Now, they have the right now since 2005, since they passed their new edict that they have the responsibility to protect. And they appealed to the new edict in order to go into Libya because there were people dying there. There were people there who were trying to overthrow the government. So the government of Gaddafi moved against them to stop them from overthrowing the government. And the international community said, aha, you are now making war against your own citizens who happen to be trying to overthrow your government, but nevertheless, we have a right, a responsibility to protect these people because they cannot stand before their government. So you see how this all is manipulated to get where the world planners really want to go. Okay, but it was approved by a UN resolution that a no-fly zone would be established over Libya and it has now been done. Not only are we enforcing a no-fly zone, we're also going in and bombing tanks, bombing soldiers belonging to Gaddafi, all under the name of approval by the world government. So it's a legal war. Okay, now, so what's the point? Once the Palestinians apply to the United Nations, and it is the consensus that if they apply in September, which they plan to do, that's the next time the UN General Assembly convenes. If they apply, it is the consensus that it will be approved. Now, once they become a nation, especially if the resolution says this is a nation and the borders are the pre-1967 borders, if they can get that done. Now, that remains yet to be seen, because in order to do that, the United Nations would have to violate one of its own resolutions, because Resolution 242 and 338 said that Israel should trade land for peace and that the borders should be determined by negotiation among the parties. It didn't say the borders should be the pre-1967 borders. It said the borders should be determined by negotiation between the parties. So that's going to be a real sticking point. Now, the United States looks at all this with horror, because it realizes all the work that it's done since the beginning is getting ready to go out the window, and the United Nations may, in fact, unilaterally declare a Palestinian state within pre-1967 borders. Now, once that happens, Israel has a lot of people beyond pre-1967 borders. What do you do with all of those people? And Israel has occupying forces out there in the West Bank. So now is Israel an illegal occupier? And then does the United Nations pass a resolution against Israel? And when Israel does not comply, does the United Nations then invade the land of Israel? Well, I can show you in the Bible, the United Nations is going to invade the land of Israel. You can open up and read it for yourself. Zechariah chapter 14, verse number 2. I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. Now, God's going to be the motivator, but they're not going to know that. They're going to think it's their own volition. They're going to say in their own minds, we're going to go down to the city, the land of unwalled villages, and we are going to take a spoil. So when things are happening in the world, there's a lot of forces in play. It's not just one force. There are many players in the world chessboard. And many times you have Satan, you have God, you have nations, you have world leaders who are neither tuned in to Satan or to God. So a lot of times you have world powers such as communism, and it does still exist, no matter what Newsweek said back in 1989 and 1990 that socialism is now dead, and then 20 years later came out with another headline, we're all socialists now, and it's like Newsweek can't make up in its mind whether it's pitching or catching, but anyway, they did feature both headlines. So you have communism, you have capitalism, you have Islamism, you have Catholicism, you have Masons, you have international bankers, you have one-worlders. So there are a lot of forces that are vying for control of the world. Now, fortunately, there is one of those powers that's always had the trump card and always will, and that's Almighty God. But we are right now moving on to the end time stage where you're going to watch it all play out with all these players. Wow, we got so much to talk about. We'll be back.
Endtime Ministries presents End of the Age, a 30-minute commercial-free TV show hosted by Irvin Baxter. Every Monday, End of the Age airs on the Church Channel at 9 p.m., Daystar at 10 p.m., and on TBN every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., all Central Standard Time. On End of the Age, Irvin depicts how modern issues like an establishment of a one-world government, the religion of Islam, a coming World War III, and more line up so clearly with Bible prophecies written over 2,000 years ago. To get tomorrow's news today, be sure to tune into End of the Age every Monday on the Church Channel at 9 p.m., Daystar at 10 p.m., and on TBN every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., all Central Standard Time. Visit endtime.com for more details or call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.